The 16th century saw Europe engulfed in terror. Plague and smallpox were familiar harbingers of death, but now a new pestilence had arrived. It ravaged cities and decimated families. Syphilis. Imported from the New World, it consumed flesh, disfigured faces, and drove people to madness, killing not hundreds, but millions. Physicians were helpless, and the Inquisition saw it as divine punishment. Yet amid this chaos there was one man, Gabriele Falloppio. A titan of anatomy and a professor at the University of Padua, he didn't just observe, he acted. He saw not a curse, but a problem. He sought not prayer, but a method. And he found it. Falloppio created something revolutionary, an incredible barrier for its time. A thin linen sheath, soaked in salt and special herbs. He didn't just invent it, he tested it. On 111 men. They used it before contact, and not a single one contracted the disease. This was the first scientifically tested and proven effective condom in history, a defense against the Great Plague of the New Age. But this story isn't about an instantaneous revelation from the heavens, nor a lone genius who single-handedly transformed the world overnight. Scientific discoveries are not isolated flashes of light in a void. They are the result of decades of agonizing searches, brutal and often deadly experiments, and the incredible courage to challenge established dogmas. It was not a miracle, but relentless, exhausting labor. And it is precisely in this difficult, often bloody process that truth is born, a truth that changes the course of history. In the 16th century, medicine was not a science. It was a collection of rituals, a belief in ancient texts, and a blind worship of authority. For over a millennium, the only accepted truths were the works of the ancient Greeks and Romans, Hippocrates, Galen, Aristotle. Their words were law, immutable and beyond questioning. For why seek new knowledge when it was believed to have already been given? Why doubt what had been consecrated by centuries? This was a world where observation and experimentation were not just discouraged. They were considered heresy, an encroachment on the divine order, a violation of ancestral tenets. A physician of that era was not an explorer but an interpreter, a scholastic memorizing Latin and Greek treatises. He looked into a book, not at the patient. Dissecting a human body was strictly forbidden. Anatomy was a sacred, inviolable mystery. Consequently, doctors had no idea how the human body was structured internally. They fought an invisible enemy blindly. Wounds were cauterized with red-hot iron or poured over with boiling oil, a method believed to expel bad humors. In reality, it only added unbearable shock, burns, infection, and gangrene to the patient's suffering. Few survived. Most died from the treatment itself. Pus accumulating in wounds was considered laudable, a sign that the body was cleansing itself, that the illness was exiting. No one understood it was a breeding ground for bacteria, a gateway for new, deadly infections. Death was inevitable. In this system, the patient was not an object of care but a testing ground for dogma. Their body was tormented by bloodletting, as it was believed that an excess of blood caused illness. So blood was drained until the person fainted or died from exhaustion. They were poisoned with emetics and laxatives to expel imaginary poisons, dehydrating and weakening the body. Yet doctors continued to follow their statutes. 16th century medicine was not salvation. It was another form of execution, cruel and hopeless. The world was plunged into the darkness of ignorance, and only those who dared to challenge the very foundations of this world, those willing to see the truth, even if it was bloody and terrifying, could change it. One such person was Gabriele Falloppio. He was born in Modena in 1523 into a family that, while not the most distinguished, was sufficiently affluent. His path was not predetermined. He could have become another scholastic memorizing ancient texts. But there was something different about him. Falloppio possessed acute observational skills and an insatiable thirst for knowledge. He didn't just read, he observed. And what he saw did not fit within the confines of old dogmas. His early years were spent studying medicine, delving into the works of Galen and Hippocrates. But his true education began not in lecture halls. It began at the bedsides of the dying. Falloppio worked in hospitals in Padua, Ferrara, and Pisa. He witnessed an abyss of suffering. He saw how doctors blindly tried to treat ailments, how their laudable pus corroded flesh, how wounds cauterized with iron became foci of death, and how syphilis disfigured and maddened people, while powerless physicians merely shrugged or continued their rituals. He saw how bloodletting exhausted and killed, how emetics debilitated already weakened bodies. He saw that the treatment was often worse than the disease itself. These were not isolated cases. This was everyday reality. Thousands of lives ruined by ignorance, hundreds of bodies disfigured by healing. This experience didn't just shock him, it shattered his faith in the system, in the medicine that called itself science, but was merely a collection of cruel rites. Falloppio understood. Books lie. Traditions kill. Truth is not in ancient scrolls. It is in the human body, in its reactions, in its suffering. He stopped trusting authorities and began trusting his eyes, his hands. He started asking questions, not those demanded by dogma, but those born of pain and death. It was a solitary path, full of dangers, for every such question was a challenge to the entire established world, a world that did not want to see the truth. Falloppio didn't just ask questions. He sought answers where it was forbidden to look. For the first time in 1,000 years, he turned to the very source of knowledge, the human body. He began dissecting corpses, doing so secretly, at night, risking everything. Each dissection was an act of audacious defiance. He saw what no one before him had seen, the complex interweaving of vessels, nerves, and muscles. He mapped human anatomy, erasing millennia of misconceptions. He saw how syphilis internally disfigured organs, how it slowly devoured the body. This was not merely knowledge, it was a revelation. He understood. Fighting syphilis once the disease had already entered the body was futile. All their poultices, all their bloodletting, all their prayers, they were just an imitation of struggle. The oil of traditional methods had run dry. It didn't work. It couldn't stop the plague. The only way out was different. To stop the disease before it affected the person, to prevent infection. This was an idea that seemed insane. How could one stop an invisible enemy? His genius lay in his observational skills and practical approach. He knew that syphilis was transmitted through physical contact, meaning a barrier needed to be created. But what kind? From what? He experimented with various materials, studying the properties of fabrics. He sought something thin enough not to interfere, yet strong enough to protect. He settled on a thin linen cloth. But simple fabric was not enough. He sought a way to make it more effective. He turned to his knowledge of herbs and salts that might possess antiseptic properties. He developed a special solution. He soaked the linen sheath in it, adding salt to create an unfavorable environment for pathogenic miasmas, and a set of astringent herbs that he hoped could seal or neutralize harmful agents. It was not just a cloth pouch. It was a complex medical instrument based on his most advanced knowledge of hygiene and the properties of substances. But theory without practice was nothing. Falloppio was not a scholastic. He was an experimentalist. He needed proof, and he conducted a trial unprecedented for his time. He gathered a group of 111 men, all of whom were at high risk of contracting syphilis. He provided them with his linen sheaths and gave clear instructions to use them before each sexual contact. The result was astonishing. Several months later, when he checked each of the 111 participants, not a single one had contracted syphilis. Not one. At a time when the disease was reaping millions, when every contact was a deadly risk, his method showed 100% effectiveness. This was not a miracle. It was science. It was the first scientifically tested and proven effective method in human history for preventing a venereal disease. This victory over an invisible enemy was no accident. It was made possible by Gabriele Falloppio's unique way of thinking. He didn't just seek a solution. He overturned the very foundation of knowledge. Rejecting ancient books, he turned to reality. He trusted his eyes, his hands. This was empiricism in its purest form, a method that, in the 16th century, was akin to a daring challenge. He did not wait for revelations. He sought answers in flesh and blood, in diseases, in suffering. His approach was systematic. He not only dissected corpses to understand the body's structure, but also observed the living, how disease developed, how the body reacted to attempts at healing. He witnessed thousands of failures of traditional medicine, and each failure was not a condemnation but a question. Why? He analyzed, compared facts, and sought patterns where others saw only divine punishment. This is how he came to understand the modes of syphilis transmission, not through miasmas or curses, but through physical contact. The path to creating the barrier was long. Falloppio did not experience an instant flash of insight. He experimented with various materials, with fabrics of different densities, with various impregnations. Some tore at the slightest tension. Some caused irritation. Others simply did not provide adequate protection. He encountered failures again and again. Each mistake was a valuable lesson. He modified his designs, improved the compositions, and tested new combinations of salts and herbs until he found the ideal balance of strength, elasticity, and antiseptic properties. It was an exhausting process of trial and error, lasting for years. His genius lay not only in his invention. He understood that knowledge must be accessible. He did not hide his discoveries. His works, such as On the French Disease, were revolutionary for their time. They didn't just describe the disease, they offered a solution based on observation and experiment. Falloppio didn't just write. He taught in Padua, one of Europe's leading medical centers. He passed his methods on to students, shaping a new generation of doctors who learned to trust not books, but their own eyes. And his invention itself, the linen sheath, became a powerful tool of influence. It was not just an object. It was a material symbol of a new approach to medicine. It was proof that disease could be fought not with incantations, but with engineering thought, not with faith, but with verification. Falloppio not only offered protection, he offered a new way of thinking, a method that allowed humanity, for the first time in history, to take control over one of the most terrible threats of its time. He showed that truth is born not in the debates of scholastics, but in the laboratory, in the anatomical theater, at the patient's bedside, in the relentless search for answers that save lives. Such a breakthrough could not go unnoticed, nor could it be easily accepted. The medical establishment of the 16th century, which had lived for centuries by the tenets of Galen and Hippocrates, met Falloppio's discoveries not with enthusiasm, but with fury. His method was not just new, it was heresy, a challenge to everything their world stood upon. The guardians of ancient dogmas could not accept a simple linen sheath. They branded him a charlatan, accusing him of infringing upon divine order. For syphilis, in their conviction, was God's punishment for sins, and Falloppio offered a way to avoid this punishment. This was not just treatment, it was blasphemy. Physicians, accustomed to complex rituals of bloodletting and cauterization, could not believe that such a simple object could stop a plague. They saw in it a threat to their authority, to their centuries-old traditions. His invention undermined the very foundation of their practice. They rejected him, calling his works dangerous, and demanded that his research be forbidden. His anatomical theaters, where he dissected corpses, were already grounds for accusations of impiety. Now, with this immoral invention, he became an even more dangerous renegade, an accomplice to depravity. Voices of condemnation sounded everywhere, from university pulpits and church altars. He was accused of encouraging sin with his method, of opening the path to promiscuity without consequences. This was not a scientific dispute. It was a war of worldviews. The old world, clinging to its delusions, tried to stifle the sprouts of new knowledge. But Falloppio had his defenders. The University of Padua, one of the most progressive in Europe, valued him as an outstanding anatomist and thinker. His students, who had seen the results of his work with their own eyes, spread his ideas, and most importantly, his method worked. The test results were undeniable. 111 men, protected by his invention, remained healthy. In a world where syphilis killed millions, this was the only real proof. Powerful patrons, weary of traditional medicine's helplessness in the face of a fierce epidemic, saw Falloppio not as a heretic, but as a savior. These princes, influential families, even members of the church whose loved ones suffered from this terrible disease, provided him protection. They enabled him to continue his research and financed his work. They needed not ancient theories, but real solutions. Not prayers, but tangible protection. This struggle was long and arduous. Falloppio did not just fight for his invention. He fought for the right of science to be free, for the right to seek truth not in ancient books, but in the real world, in the human body, for the right to save lives, even if it went against centuries-old dogmas and strict moral codes. His victory was not only a triumph over disease, it was a victory over ignorance, over the fear of the new, over what hindered human development. And this victory was proof. Truth, confirmed by experience, will always break through, even through the thickest veil of prejudice and resistance. Truth indeed broke through. Not in the debates of scholastics, nor in the discussions of churchmen. It unfolded in the anatomical theater of Padua. Gabriele Falloppio didn't just lecture, he showed. Under his scalpel, in the light of oil lamps, the mysteries of the human body were revealed. Nerves, vessels, organs, everything that had remained hidden for 1,000 years behind a veil of prohibitions now became evident. He demonstrated the structure of the uterine tubes, which today bear his name. He showed the complex structure of the ear. Hundreds of students, future doctors from all over Europe, flocked to Padua. They saw it with their own eyes. They could no longer believe ancient scrolls. They believed what they saw. This flood of irrefutable evidence, year after year, in each new dissection, in each public lecture, broke down the walls of ignorance. Old professors, entrenched in their dogmas, tried to resist. Their words drowned in the noise of the new truth. Doctors who had previously condemned him were now forced to acknowledge his authority, because his knowledge provided the key to understanding diseases. They saved lives. His method, his linen sheath, was no longer blasphemy. It became salvation. The University of Padua, which became a stronghold of new medicine, protected him. His works, one after another, were republished throughout Europe. They became the foundation for a new generation of doctors. Falloppio's name ceased to be synonymous with heresy. It became a symbol of breakthrough. He did not wait for recognition. He forced the world to accept the truth. He did not merely fight one disease. He overturned the very methodology of healing. He showed, knowledge is not granted from above. It is acquired. Through hard work, through blood, and through a relentless search for answers in reality itself. Falloppio's victory over syphilis did not end with the 111 men. It gave a powerful impetus to a new generation of physicians. His successful experiment, which scientifically proved the effectiveness of a preventive method, forever changed the understanding of disease control. If previously treatment involved attempts to expel an ailment that had already entered the body, it now became clear. Disease could be stopped at the threshold. This was not just a tool, it was a new strategy. Physicians trained by Falloppio or who read his works began to apply his principles. Syphilis treatment protocols, though initially still harsh, gradually began to evolve. The main emphasis shifted from meaningless bloodletting and cauterization to a deeper study of infection transmission routes. An understanding of the need for patient isolation and meticulous hygiene emerged. And although the linen sheath did not instantly become a ubiquitous item, the very idea of barrier protection became ingrained in the medical consciousness. It showed that humanity was not helpless in the face of an epidemic, that control could be asserted. Changes also touched the very heart of medicine. The universities. The University of Padua, where Falloppio taught, became a center for anatomical research. The number of public dissections increased. Students now not only memorized Galen's texts, they saw the human body. This led to more accurate diagnoses. Physicians could better localize injuries and understand the consequences of internal damage. Although overall survival statistics in the 16th century still remained disheartening due to other diseases and the absence of antibiotics, regarding specific infections like syphilis, a light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Despair was replaced by hope, based on knowledge, not blind faith. His approach began to spread throughout Europe. Doctors from other countries came to Padua to learn from him and his followers. They returned home carrying not only new knowledge about anatomy, but, most importantly, the idea of the empirical method, a method based on observation, experimentation, and demonstrable results. This was the beginning of the end of an era when medicine was merely the interpretation of ancient books. It was the birth of modern science, where every step was confirmed by fact. And this change, this new attitude toward knowledge, became Gabriele Falloppio's most monumental legacy. Gabriele Falloppio didn't just invent a barrier. He showed, truth is not granted from above. It is born in the anatomical theater, in the hospital, at the bedside of the dying. His linen sheath, created to combat a shameful disease, became not merely a means of protection. It proved to be a hammer that shattered millennia-old dogmas. This is the paradox of his legacy. A humble object, born from the courage to challenge prejudice, launched an avalanche of change. He proved that knowledge is not blind faith. It is a relentless search for answers in reality itself, a search that always triumphs over the dark